Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co host, Jeremy. But more importantly, we're joined by Nicole, an accredited practicing dietitian and director from Food Freedom. How are you going today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you guys?
Pretty well, pretty well. Very hot day today, but you know what? It's a great day to get stuck in on the topic of food, of
Yes.
intuitive eating, and all that lovely stuff. So we wanted to get you on to talk up to us a little bit about what the evidence says. What is the evidence-based research when it comes to diet, when it comes to body image? And this, with
Yeah.
all the kind of fluff online, we thought you'd be an excellent person to come on and kind of share your thoughts and insights. Do you want to tell our listeners a bit about what you do? What is a day in the life of someone who is a dietitian?
Yeah. So typically on a day I probably see about maybe 6 to 8 clients, and a lot of them tend to be eating disorder clients. So they could be from any type of eating disorder on the DSM-5. But I also see clients who just have disordered eating. So there is a difference, I guess, between the two. And yeah, I guess my job is sometimes it can be very tough, but it's something that is very rewarding as well. Because you see the progress in, the clients and how they sort of progress through their life, and, how they grow as an individual as well. So I guess, you might be thinking, what's the difference between someone who has disordered eating versus an eating disorder? And disordered eating is basically an unhealthy eating pattern. Where it goes to then an eating disorder is when those unhealthy eating patterns, their frequency increases as well as the intensity. And then they start to, I guess, other aspects of their life starts to, it starts to be impacted, whether it's their social life, whether it's even their physical health as well, mental health. So when those three parts start to be impacted, that's when it really turns into that eating disorder. And it's a lot harder to get out.
I know that, for example, I'll just put a bit of a trigger warning because there is some kind of sensitive
Mm-mm.
material when discussed with things like eating disorders. I've always been curious though. I know that the suicide rates are particularly high for those who experience bulimia nervosa and other
Yeah.
associated kind of eating disorders. What is usually the theory behind that? What's driving such high rates of self-harm and suicide?
Eating disorders for a lot of clients, and this is something that I've seen in my practice, is their form of control. As I guess, they're using their eating or not eating as a way to control their feelings, the way they feel, their mental health. And when things go wrong outside of that, that's when, their mental health is at risk because they see there is no way out. And that's where, yeah, I do have clients who, struggle with self-harm, who are suicidal. Not all, but some do. And that's because their mental health is just impacted because of the eating disorder. So yeah, it's really sad when you see, it sort of gets to that point. And another big thing that I will mention is when, especially a client who isn't having enough food, they go into what's called starvation. So their brain, is more starved. So their thinking processes are impacted. Hence why their sort of their those self-harming behaviors start to come in as well, because they're not able to rationalize.
Is it quite a multifaceted approach then to someone who is experiencing this? Like you as the dietitian, are you one part of the puzzle amongst many other puzzle pieces for that client? And if so, what does that look like? Because yeah, I can imagine it's complex, and you mentioned the element of control that they want to have, and
Yeah.
the element of the psychological effect. So how do you bring parties together for something like this?
Yeah. So typically, usually in the team, there'll be myself, so a dietitian, there'll be a psychologist, and there will be a GP. So I would say they're probably the three main team members that I would say to help this person with their recovery. For example, a psychologist might pick up on something that the dietitian may not, or vice versa. And you have to be able to work together to then help that client. Um, even, from a client who just has disordered eating, being able to pick up when it then turns into an eating disorder is really important. And being able to pick up on that is really essential. Because if it's not, that's when it can lead to really poor mental health as well, and those risks of suicide or self-harm. Yeah.
What are those signs to look out for someone that, is maybe feeling like they might be on the verge of having an unhealthy relationship with food, with exercise? What are those typical signs and symptoms to look out for, both for them and for other people around them?
Yeah. So I think it's when the frequency of those unhealthy behaviors becomes like really, really frequent. So for instance, laxative misuse, if that starts to happen, like they start to feel like they need to have it, like they can't go, for example, let's just say, they're going somewhere and they forgot their laxatives at home. It's like, no, I need to go home to get it. Like they're making their parents go home and drive them. They need to go and get those laxatives. It becomes like an obsession. And I think that's with other behaviors as well, whether it's purging, restrictive eating, all those sorts of things. So it's when it becomes obsessive.
How can you best approach it as someone surrounded by someone that is maybe going through this?
It's being able to be honest with that person, but in a way of like, in a really gentle approach. So not sort of saying, this is what you're doing, you're harming yourself, like not in that way. You want to be able to approach it in a way of like, look, I am, a bit worried about you. How about we go, see whether it's starting with, anyone, dietitian, psychologist, GP, just to see what they say. Yeah, because I am a little bit worried about you and I just want to make sure that you're okay. How about we go together?
What is a dietitian's perspective and opinion on calorie counting? For a lot of gym bros, it's the best way to track whether they're getting their macronutrients in. It can also serve as almost like a short-term solution to become more of an intuitive eater. That's on one end. On the other end, though, the mere fact of calorie counting can be such an incredible source of anxiety for a lot of people and can be a risk factor, especially for someone who might be predisposed to certain kind of anxiety presentations, potentially ruminating on food and so forth. What's your view on it?
Yeah, calorie counting, I feel like, I also feel like it's really dependent on the individual. But I always say, if you've got any history of disordered eating of any sort, or obsession, you've gone on a diet and you've become, a little bit, obsessed on it, I would then not recommend calorie counting. I've got friends, I've even had clients who have, used the calorie counting apps and they've been totally fine. Yeah, I've got friends who, are fitness coaches and they use it and they're totally fine. Like they use it as a way to understand their macros, to, they're still able to go out with mates and, have dinner and they're all good. That's when that's okay. But if you start to become obsessed, and it all comes back to that, it's that obsession, that's when it's not good at all.
Yeah. I know I can speak even from personal experience with that, just going to the gym, and when I started trying to educate myself on macronutrients, and I spent a while on MyFitnessPal and tracking calories, and on the one hand, it was fantastic because I got to know what was in the food I was eating. But it also did reach a point for me personally where I was wondering, should I even have this apple? Because I know this apple has 85 calories and has X amount of carbs. And is that necessary right now? Do I need to have it?
Yeah.
And it was that moment where I knew, if you're even trying to be specific about whether you should have fruit or vegetables, something is not right here, and that it's probably unhealthy. With people though that do come to you and have had these experiences with calorie counting, is it really a case by case situation, or is it a situation where you just say go cold turkey?
If they come to me with like obviously disordered eating or an eating disorder, there is no way they are calorie counting. We get on that app and we delete it right then and there. Obviously they can re-download it, but we go through it in session, and we even slowly do it. Whether it's you've got clients that there is no way they're going to go cold turkey and just not do it. So then I work with them to eventually sort of stop it. And we eventually stop it. But yeah, it's something that I just suggest of like, no, it's not going to help you with healing your relationship with food at all. So to sort of answer your question overall, I would say more often than not, it's unhelpful.
Do you think it comes back to that element of control again? Because you mentioned control is a big theme when it comes to these eating disorders and disordered eating.
Yeah.
And is that element of control associated with like potentially calorie counting? And that leads into, I guess, my next point is, for someone like you to come along and say, delete that app, would that maybe give them even more of a sense of, no, I actually need to regain control and decide what I need to do for myself? And how do you overcome that?
Spot on. Yeah. So 100%. So so we often talk about like the eating disorder as this sort of negative voice in your head, right? So right now that voice is telling you, no, you need that app, right? You need to download that app. Otherwise you're going to lose control. But the reality is that they're not going to lose control, but they need to, I guess, have trust that they're not going to lose that control. So we sort of do different things along the way, like challenges where they realize, no, that they can do this. They don't need to listen to that voice or have that sort of control, right? Because right now we sort of draw on like that voice has got a hold of them. So that voice is actually controlling them. Whereas they can regain that control, because all of those calorie counting apps, or whether it's restriction, skipping meals, that's all control.
I suppose it also depends on the reason they're doing it. And it's all, I know, because in my psychology studies, the best way to view something is just by functional impact. So to what extent is it interrogating and impacting every other facet of their life? And I think what I really like about what you said there before about the whole calorie counting conversation is that it really is a case by case basis, but you've got to understand the person's intention, why they calorie counting in the first place. What is the reason behind their control? Is there something a little bit deeper going on that we haven't really touched the surface on yet? And I suppose one thing I'm really, really interested in, and maybe this is something I've always been blessed with upbringing, and maybe, Jeremy, you've been the same, but where I would say I would like to think I'm an intuitive eater. I've never calorie counted anything. And I don't know if this is something that's naturally developed, but I've always kind of had the view of like, I try to live by the 80-20 rule, which is everything I eat for 80% of the time is going to be healthy, it's going to be nutritional, and it's going to be something I enjoy eating, because that's what's going to be sustainable over the long run. But the 20 or 10%, that's reserved for the weekends. That's reserved for a nice cheat meal. That's reserved for a nice burger. That's reserved for just having a good time, because life's meant to be lived. Would you say that's kind of in line with the first level principles of what intuitive eating is, or is it something else?
So you're saying more the 80-20, right? Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Is that in line? Yeah. Not sort of, but not quite. So like intuitive eating it's actually a really hard skill for someone who hasn't, who is not an intuitive eater. It's actually a really hard thing to sort of, adopt. So these principles that, I sort of take my clients through. So intuitive eating is listening to your body. So, all the main things. So eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, but it's also honoring your cravings, which, to be honest, that could happen midweek. It might not happen on the weekend. So I could, I don't know, maybe, you could, at the office, there's donuts or something. And you know what? You're like, oh, I actually feel like a donut in the afternoon, right? So you have one donut, you have it, you're all good. Yeah. And you move on with your day. Right. And it sounds really simple and it sounds straightforward, but it's actually a really hard thing for a lot of people to do, and to not feel guilty after, or to be like, oh, should I really be having this donut right now? Oh, should I? But then if I do it, then, I might gain weight, or like, but I've already eaten, a bigger lunch. Like, oh, but why do I feel like this? There's so many questions that go through someone's mind if they have disordered eating, or especially an eating disorder. And that's why intuitive eating you don't have those thoughts. It's like you eat because you want it, and that's it. And you don't overeat on these foods, and you realize you actually don't want these foods as much as you think you will, because that's a common fear that often happens as well. It's, oh, but if I have unconditional permission to have, whatever I want when I want, I'm going to be having like Macca's every single day for the next 3 months. But it's like, no, you think you will. And initially you might want it more often, but really over time you won't.
It sounds a bit like
that.
that forbidden fruit. When something's forbidden, you want it more. But when you have, as you said, that
Correct.
unconditional permission, you want to have it, you have it, but that novelty, that mistake about it being forbidden, it's now removed.
Correct. And that's exactly what it is. And that's what I take my clients through. It's, you always want something that you shouldn't or you can't have. So that desire to have it is just increased. And that's why, like, for example, I'll give you like binge eating disorder. With binge eating disorder, my clients who have binge eating disorder, they restrict their intake throughout the day, and then they'll binge eat, say, at night or in the afternoon. And it's this constant cycle. But it's because they don't allow themselves to have these foods, and they always binge eating on these foods that they see as bad, right? But if you take that moral, or that word away from it, then it's just like an apple's an apple, a donut's a donut. You eat a donut, when you have it, you're satisfied, cool, move on, right? Again, this is very hard to do in practice, but essentially that's ideally what you want to get to. Yeah, and you won't want a donut as much as you think you want a donut, but you'll have it when you want it.
A big theme of it, obviously, which can't be ignored, is social media influence. And, this is a whole nother can of worms and can be a whole nother podcast episode. But there's big approaches on social media about, types of diet, what diet you should have. I mean, at the moment now, a lot of whole food is being advertised, which is fantastic. But, some people might view that and think, okay, if whole foods are the optimal thing, does that mean I can't have a piece of bread anymore? What is your approach to, teaching someone through the whole, concept of social media and understanding what they're seeing and understanding that, not everything is true on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a topic I go through with all my clients. Social media, it is the way of the world today, right? Everything's on social media. But you cannot believe everything that you see, that you hear, especially nutrition. Nutrition isn't black or white. It's very gray. And, what works for one person will not work for another person. I think that's really, really important. And I really try and emphasize that to my clients. Another thing is body image and social media. You can't believe everything that you see. You really can't, because there's editing apps these days. There's also angles. There's lighting. There's so many things that can make a person look a certain way. And you can't believe everything you see, because no one is perfect.
One thing that I've always been a little bit curious about is the whole body positivity movement, because intentionally I understand it, because we're now living in a society where, as you just said, social media, insanely unrealistic with what it portrays. It makes us believe that we can strive for perfection, and maybe a potential antidote to that is just promoting everyday bodies and, just being positive regardless of shape or size. I think one concern that a lot of people harbor, though, is that it can go a little bit the other way, to the point where we start normalizing obesity, normalizing, some, conditions that might be a major risk factor for developing a lot of health complications, whether it's type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. What is a dietitian's view, not only necessarily on the body positivity movement, but is there a way in which we can have a nuanced conversation about body positivity without it potentially normalizing unhealthy eating behaviors as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it all comes back to, engaging in those health promoting behaviors. Because if you're not engaging in those health promoting behaviors, then, for example, you mentioned obesity. Like, yes, obesity can happen, right? But if you are, then you shouldn't get to that point. Do you know what I mean? Like, again, everyone's body is different, so that doesn't matter in terms of weight or anything like that, but it shouldn't get to that point of obesity. So that's something I really try and strive for. Is I'm all about obviously health, right? At the end of the day, but that also means, you know, your physical health too, but your mental health, social health. Yeah, it's basically, if you engage in those health promoting behaviors, you shouldn't really get to that point of obesity. Also touching on body positive movement, I think the intention is good, but one other big thing that I really try and emphasize is also body neutrality. We are all human, right? We're not going to love our bodies every single day. That's why one thing that I really try and, I guess, a goal that I really try and reach with my clients is body neutrality. So it's just about body acceptance. It's realizing that, yeah, you're not going to love your body every day, but that's okay. The main thing is that it just doesn't ruin your entire day. Like if you wake up one morning and you're like, oh, I don't feel, you know, I'm having a bit of a rough body image day. You admit it to yourself and you're like, yeah, cool, that's what it is, but I'm going to try and do this, this, and this to help me feel better. Yeah. And that's how it is. So it's, you're accepting your body, but it's not feeling like, oh, I have to be fully positive about it. No, you don't need to, right? That's cool too. It's fine. You know, we're human. So I feel like that's something that's not really talked about with the body positive movement, which I think should be.
So with that, I really like the point about you trying to incorporate a lot of health promoting things to offset, you know, the obesity and the unhealthy conditions that can develop. But for someone that, you know, has those thoughts, it could be a young girl, it could be a young person, could be anyone that has those thoughts in their mind of, you know, should I eat this? Should I not do this? I am skinny objectively, but I think I'm fat. And I look at that girl and she's got, you know, tighter thighs than what I have. How do you tell someone that is constantly thinking like this to just accept and move on and be content with themselves?
Yeah, so you're thinking more of that body dysmorphia, so seeing yourself as very different to what you are. With that one's a little bit of a trickier one because it's about, you can't just tell them, oh no, you know, you're not fat, or you're not, you know, you have thin thighs, if they don't see themselves as having thin thighs. It's about getting them to find ways in which the eating disorder voice is lying to them. So, for example, clothing size. Have their clothing size changed? No. Have their, you know, their jewelry size, is it loose or is it the same? It's the same. Even, for example, sometimes we do draw on weight and it's like their weight hasn't changed, but somehow their mind's telling them that they're, you know, at a high weight, or them seeing themselves as a high weight, but really they're exactly the same. So it's looking for ways that, yeah, that voice, that negative voice is lying to them. So that's sort of where we have to start with, because by me saying, oh no, you have to, you know, that's not how you look like, it doesn't really help.
So looking more for objective measures rather than subjective measures.
Correct.
Yeah. With that as well, I'm intrigued to know, how does, I guess, community play a role here? Because when it comes to fitness, when it comes to exercise, health in general, we're very much about, I guess, community, bringing other people with us. You know, you see the run club influence, you see, you know, gym influence, people training together, you know, going out for meals, people are eating together. Because we're so community based when it comes to food, when it comes to health and nutrition, is the treatment for it, you know, for someone that is going through a rough time with it all, does the treatment involve some community to it as well? So, you know, would you ever get, you know, people come together that are suffering these same things, or would you keep it pretty separate?
As they progress through recovery, I think that would be a really, really great thing. But I think initially, they probably need a lot of that one-on-one support. And then when they get to a stage where it's like, you know, maybe they're starting to see a way through, or how, you know, that negative voice is sort of lying to them and they're able to see that, then I think, you know, they could start to engage in those communities, sort of, you know, like you said, the runs or whatever it might be, to get themselves out there and seeing that, you know, it's more about doing things to make them feel good and their body feels good, rather than anything what they see through the mirror.
With Instagram, you know, it's the first thing that comes to my mind always, you know, where you see someone post a photo of themselves and the comments are flooded with how they look. You know, you look stunning, you look beautiful,
Yes.
blah blah blah,
Yeah.
and a lot of it sometimes is just related to what their body looks like. What is your take on this? And do you feel like, you know, at times some people can be each other's worst enemies when it sounds like it's all good from the outset, and it sounds like there's a lot of positivity and boosting, but do you find that it can actually be doing more harm than good sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think it's sort of, it's also like diet culture and talking about bodies is very, it's diet culture is all around us, or even just talking about bodies in general is all around us. People might see someone and be like, oh, you've lost weight, you look great. Do you know what I mean? It's such a common um compliment, maybe I'd say it's a common compliment that is used in today's society. And it's the same as what you just said, Jeremy, with like Instagram. It's like, oh, you have an amazing body, or you look, your body's stunning, or whatever it is. So absolutely it can have a detrimental effect, because sometimes it's like, how do you know the person in that image isn't struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder? And that could just be, further escalating those thoughts about, oh, I've got to keep this up, and that sense of control. So.
No, that's very fascinating, because what I'm gathering, from this conversation more broadly, is just this idea that we want people to feel comfortable, within themselves, but more importantly, feel comfortable with the food that they're eating, not to demonize themselves, not to think in just concrete black and white, this is bad, this is good, but to have a more kind of nuanced relationship with food, such that they can find a diet, or not even a diet, but a lifestyle that's tailored towards their needs, that's tailored towards how they feel. Would you say, I'm curious to know, when it comes to kind of the split in gender, males and females, they'll present for different reasons, whether it be to therapy. I'm curious to know, though, I know eating disorders and disordered eating, it's much more disclosed by females than it is males. But I think in the last few years, with stigma kind of being reduced, I think more males have started to present with body dysmorphia. Have you seen that sort of increase in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably say in the last 2 years, it's really increased. Probably females, I would say there's probably 60% females on average from the studies that I've read with body dysmorphia versus 40% males. So females, it is a little bit more common in females still, but the presentation in males is becoming a lot more common. And I think it's because of, again, social media, the gym, using, having to like bulk and shred, or like, the protein, right? It's everywhere. So they see it, I've got clients, they're like teenage boys who are in high school trying to do all this stuff. So, it's becoming a lot more common in males. And I think it is because, with females, they tend to sort of seek support first initially compared to males. So that could even also be the case, rather than it actually being more females. It's just that more females have actually come for support.
Would the approach to treating that be different than from male to female? And it doesn't need to just be for a body dysmorphia case, but for a disordered eating case as well, because we know that there's a lot of talk with just seeking psychology, seeking therapy. There's a lot of talk that the approach to, therapy for a male should be different to the approach for a female. Is it the same here as well with what you encounter?
Slightly, but it's very, very similar, I would say. Because I think the core concepts of what you're doing are essentially the same. Like you're guiding them through, whether it is, like getting them to, or the education on nutrition, but also the intuitive eating part is, it's the same. It wouldn't be any different from a male versus a female.
I guess to that person listening that, like we sat here and we spoke about intuitive eating in the way in which we believed it to be, with like 80-20 rules, but it's a lot more complex and nuanced than that. How can someone, I guess, best approach what we call, in quotations, intuitive eating? What are the key steps, easy steps that they can do to start intuitively eating?
The number one step that I like to sort of start with is giving yourself permission to eat when you're craving something. So, when you notice that you're craving, whether it be, a snack or a particular meal, allow yourself to have it. So give yourself permission to have that particular meal or snack. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing to start with, and knowing that you are allowed to have it and you don't need to feel guilty no matter what it is, whether it's some type of salad or whether it's like, I don't know, a panini or a donut, whatever it might be. You have permission to have it, and you don't need to feel guilty for it whatsoever.
Nicole, on behalf of Jeremy and myself, we want to say a massive thank you for you jumping on our podcast and telling us a little bit about the world of a dietitian, what goes on, some of your thoughts and opinions, because I'll just reiterate the point, with all the fluff online, it's actually good to get someone with an evidence-based background to illuminate the truth and the evidence and the science. So for that, I want to say a massive thank you. Where is the best place for people to come and find you and the work that you do?
Yeah, probably Instagram or my website. I've also got a TikTok as well going on. So either of those would be good. Yeah, they can find me there.
Well, thank you for coming on again, Nicole. And
No worries.
we'll put everything in the show notes below. And thank you for all the work you do. And we can't wait to see what you continue to accomplish.
Thanks so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.